Welcome to video number 4 in our tutorial series on Comancheria. Basically, if you haven't watched the first 3 videos, it would probably be a good idea to do that. You're kind of in the middle of something here. But what these videos are designed to do is walk you through the tutorial that is included in the playbook of Comancheria. So where we left off is we're up in the upper right-hand column of page 7 in the playbook. And we're about to start the operation cleanup phase in the sequence of play. We just did a hunt with one of our bands, and then we did a raid with one of our bands. And so the situation at present is we've taken some captives. We left a ravage counter here on the tribe in Upper Arkansas number 4. There are some success counters in the medicine track here of the Mehimiana from Rancheria A. There are some enemy AP counters down here in the available enemy APs box below the enemy instruction display. And we have a couple stacks of our pieces over here. So let's go ahead and I'll zoom in the map a little bit so we can see this better on your screen. There we go. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk through Operation Cleanup phase. So every sequence of play, at the end of a turn, there is an Operation Cleanup phase. And so let's walk through that procedure. This is where stacking rules are enforced. So, and you will have read about those earlier on in some of the reading assignments. But basically the rule is this, that a space during this particular phase in the game can only maintain one band or one rancheria or one tribe or one settlement. You can't have a rancheria and a tribe or rancheria and a settlement. Basically only one hexagonal marker in a space. And the only way you can have more than one band in a space is if they are in the resources box represented by a rancheria counter. So that is another one of the utilities of a rancheria, is it allows you to have multiple bands in a single space. Resource counters do not impact stacking, so we don't have to worry about bison. Bison and rancherias can coexist. There are times when that can happen, but you're never going to find bison coexisting with a tribe counter or with a settlement counter. That almost never, I don't think there's ever an occasion where that needs to be actually enforced during the Operation Cleanup phase, but it just kind of gives you an idea that usually when a tribe moves into a space, if there's bison there, the bison are removed as part of the placement of the tribe or the placement of the settlement counter. So at this point, if we had left our band in space number 5 here, instead of bringing them home to our rancheria, you'll recall at the end of the previous video, that was something that could have happened to us. If we had not rectified that, then at this point in sequence of play, that band would have been removed back to the available stock of pieces, and all of its possessed counters would also be sent back to here and to the resources box. I believe that the Mehimiana would also be sent back to the resources box of the nearest rancheria, of its affiliated rancheria, and you'll have to check the rule book on this. I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but I believe that if he's killed as a part of stacking enforcement, that his medicine rating is set to 0. I know the rules deal with that, but I don't remember it exactly, so you'd probably want to look that up. Okay, so we're going to be at that point where stacking is enforced. We don't have to force it right now because there are no violations. But this step also does allow us to relinquish possession of counters. So we're going to go ahead and avail ourselves of that option. So we're going to unstack the Mehimiana here and all of his possessed pieces from this particular band here in Rancheria A. And so what I like to do is I like to keep the ready bands in the upper left, finished band stacked next to it. The Mehimiana I like to put in the upper right hand corner here. Horses down here, and then captives, bison, I like to keep in the middle. I'll stack the bison off to the right for now, but usually I'll keep guns and or trade goods in this corner of that box. So that's just my own little anal procedure. Anyways, so that's what we're going to do here. We've unstacked all of our possessed counters, and so now we move on to step 2 of the Operation Cleanup phase. In this step, for each Rancheria, the player will make a die roll and compare the result to the number of finished bands in that Rancheria's resources box. So basically right now I'd roll a die, and if I roll a 1 or a 2, the enemy is going to get to execute a free operation. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll just say that our die roll here is a 6, which is clearly higher than 2, and so that does not happen. I should point out that when you have multiple Rancherias in play, that this die roll is made for every Rancheria that happens to have at least one finished band in it. So you know, as I move along here, let's say I had multiple Rancherias in play, and maybe on my next operation I do take actions with Rancheria B, and maybe I got some finished bands there. Well, I still got 2 finished bands down here, so there's a 33% chance that that status is going to provoke an enemy action of some kind. So that is something else to keep in mind. And that is yet one more reason why maybe I don't want to activate all of the available bands in that Rancheria. So that's just something to think about as you move forward in learning the game. There are consequences to having lots and lots of active bands in the game. It does provoke enemy activity. So step 2 is now complete. The enemy does not get a free operation, so we move to step 3 of Operation Planet Phase, and we're going to draw a single counter from the success check draw cup. If it is an instruction counter, it gets executed. That is not going to happen right now because right now there are no instruction counters in the draw cup. However, this instruction counter that we put up here on this track as a part of the setup will eventually go into the track after our first passage of time. This counter will go into the draw cup, and that's how an instruction counter will be drawn. Once this goes into the cup, pretty much from that point all the way through the end of the game, there will always be at least one instruction, there will always be exactly one instruction counter in the draw cup. So there's a 1 in, if all the other success check counters are in the draw cup, there's a 1 in 23 chance that you're going to pull an instruction counter out. And when it gets pulled out, it gets executed, and then there will be a die roll to determine which of the other instructions belonging to that same enemy is removed from the display and put back into the draw cup. So basically the instruction letter G is going to switch places with either A, B, C, D, E, or F. So there always will be an instruction counter cycling into the draw cup that could be pulled as the course of the game goes on. So if it's an instruction, it gets executed. If we pull a counter out of the draw cup during step 3 here and it's a success, nothing happens. We put the success counter back in the cup, and there's no further effect from that. If it is an enemy APs counter, it goes into the available enemy APs box on this display here. And then what's going to happen next is we execute all of these APs down here. So in this case, let's just say that we drew a success out of the draw cup. We return it back to the cup, and now the enemy has to spend all of the available enemy APs down here that are in this box, plus any that may be saved on this track. Because we just began the game, there are no saved available enemy APs tracked over here. However, if there is at least one AP here, even if I drew a success from the draw cup, I will still have to work through this procedure because I will need to determine which active enemy is going to try to spend APs, and then I'm going to roll a die to see which counter is going to flip over for belonging to that particular column. And so even if there is only one AP available, we still have to work through this even if I drew a success out of the cup. In our case right now, there is no saved enemy APs over here on the track. However, we do have 9 APs saved up in this box here from our various raids, and we're going to have the enemy give enemy an attempt now to spend those APs. So what I want you to do here is pause the video, and I'd like for you to read section 6.1 And I'd like to read all the way from 6.1 through 6.22a in the rule book before we continue. So go ahead and just pause it here, read that assignment, and when you're done, we will continue. Okay, so you've read a substantial part in Section 6 of the rulebook. Section 6 of the rulebook pretty much governs the majority of enemy behavior in the game is governed by those particular rules, and those are some core rules that are really important to understand in playing the game. If you played Navajo Wars, you're going to find a lot that's familiar here when it comes to the enemy instruction display. If you're unfamiliar with Navajo Wars, don't worry about that. Just understand that this is the heart of the artificial intelligence in the game. So let's go ahead and walk through this this particular procedure here. First, what we're going to do, since there are enemy APs available, even though we drew a success out of the cup, we still are going to resolve what's in this box, plus whatever might be saved on the track. But we have to first identify which enemy is going to act. Is it going to be the west, the south, the east, or the north? To determine that, we're going to look over here at the enemy action table that is a part of the current history card. And right now you'll see that there's a line for the north, the west, and the south. So east is not a factor right now. There's nothing going on from the east during this entire historic period. That will eventually change. Right now, the west is the most likely to activate. The south is the least likely to activate. So we're going to make a die roll here, and let's say that we rolled a 4. That will activate the west. You can see the die roll face here on the table. So west is the active enemy, and so they're going to try to spend all of the enemy APs available to them. Now we roll a second die in step 2 of this procedure. We roll a second die. We compare the result to the die roll symbols on the left of the instruction display, and let's say we roll a 3. Since the west is the active enemy, we flip over the west C counter that says settle on it, and we flip it over from its settle side with an AP strength of 4 to its war side with an AP strength or cost of 4. So that's what happens here. And again, we would do this even if there was only 1 AP available and there's all the instructions here cost more than 1 AP. We would still work through this process because there's a chance that an instruction counter will flip. The only time that you would skip this process in the operation cleanup phase is if you drew a success out and there are 0 enemy APs on the track and 0 enemy APs in this box. That's the only time that you would skip this process. So we move over here to step 4. And at this point, it is important that the player take a moment to look at the excuse me, I'm sorry, we're in step 3. I almost skipped something, sorry. Bottom left-hand corner here now of page 8 in the playbook. Step 3 of the 622A procedure. The enemy is going to spend all of these APs that it has. It's going to spend as many APs as it possibly can without overspending. The enemy will never overspend. Whatever it cannot spend gets saved onto the track, and it might end up being used by a completely different enemy entity. For example, let's say that the West spends only 6 APs here, or spends, in this case it's more likely they will spend 7 APs and leave 2 unspent. Then maybe the next turn comes around, but we roll a 6 to see who activates. Or we roll a 2 and the North activates. Well, now the North can spend APs that originally, if you think back, they originally belonged to the West. Don't let that throw you off. It's just, this whole process is just an approximation of overall enemy activity. So don't take this too literally. If there's any enemy APs saved, they could be used by any active enemy entity at a future date. Okay, so right now there is a total of 9 enemy APs down here in the available enemy APs box. There's nothing saved on the general record track. The topmost instruction in the West column is a subjugate instruction, and it has a cost of 3 APs. So we're going to go ahead and spend 3 APs to execute this instruction, and we move the counter from its column here over to the inactive column to show that it is going to be executed. So we'll go ahead and return the 3 AP marker to the draw cup, leaving 6 left here in the box. Now, at this point, it is very, very important to note a couple things. First of all, when I spend these counters, they go back in the draw cup. Success counters don't necessarily go right back into the draw cup. They stay out of play up here, but the AP counters go back in, thus making it more likely to provoke further enemy activity until I take some kind of action that puts these back in the draw cup. It's important to keep that in mind. Second thing to keep in mind is that there are card effects, a lot of card effects in the game that can happen while in play. So I need to look at card text that says while in play. For example, on the history card it says while in play, and there's certain card text that applies. While this card is in play, this text here governs certain behaviors, and I need to pay attention to those things. Presently, up here at the top of our screen, there is an effect that's in play due to War of Spanish Succession. It says that war and subjugate instructions have no effect. The enemy spends the APs but does not actually execute the instructions procedure unless that procedure would cause the player to execute a recover instruction. What that basically means here for our current situation is that the enemy spent 3 APs to execute this instruction. It's a subjugate instruction. If there were any ravage counters in play on any Western piece, then this instruction would default into a recover instruction, in which case it would be resolved, and the while in play text on the history card would then apply, where it says enemy recover instructions only succeed on a die roll of 1 to 3. If the roll is 4 to 6, the APs are spent, but no ravage counter is removed. Okay, right now there is no ravage counters in play belonging to the west. There are ravage counters on a north, but that does not affect any of the western enemies' behavior. So the card text on the War of Spanish Succession will apply, and what that means is we spend the APs to execute this instruction, but nothing happens. Basically, the APs are wasted. So that's all that is going to happen here. So the effect of this is basically that the war in Europe that's going on over in Europe is having a chaotic effect in the colonies in North America. So that's what this is attempting in a semi-crude manner to model. So those 3 APs were spent for no effect. The subjugate instruction is considered resolved. We slide it over to the inactive column, like I said earlier, and since there's 6 enemy APs left to spend and instructions remain in the active enemies column, what we'll go ahead and do is we'll return to step 3 of the 622A procedure, and we'll again execute the topmost instruction in the active enemies column, which is culture with an AP cost of 3. And so we're going to spend 3 enemy APs to do that. So we're going to go ahead and use the 4 enemy APs counter. We're going to return that to the draw cup, but the instruction cost 3 APs, so we need to make change, as it were. So what we'll do is we'll take the available enemy APs counter on the general record track, and we'll move it from 0 to 1. So he spent 3 APs to execute the instruction, and then we save the other one. So what I'd like for you to do here is pause the video just for a moment, read a real short segment of the rulebook, section 2.11 in the rulebook, and I'd like you to read section 6.3.2 in the rulebook before we wrap the video up. Okie dokie. So in section 2.11, you read about a little bit about culture points and military points, what they do in the game. It's very similar to Navajo Wars. When you run out of culture points, if you're called upon to take further culture point loss, you lose military points instead on a 2-for-1 basis. So if I had 0 culture and I'm supposed to lose 1 more culture point, instead of losing 1 culture point, since I have 0 culture, I would lose 2 military points. So when your culture gets down to 0, your military points can evaporate. And in the game, it is very difficult to acquire more military points. So it's vital that you build up your culture, use that to good effect, to make military points out of them, and maintain your culture. If you maintain your culture in the game, you'll avoid catastrophic defeat. What's going to happen here is this is a culture attack upon the people. So the enemy in the West is basically subverting the Comanche culture. They're committing resources to that effect, and so that's what the 3 AP cost, the 3 action points that they spent to do. What that's done is it has degraded our culture. Now, how much has it degraded our culture? Well, what's going to happen here is we are going to lose 1 culture point because the enemy in the West does not have a settlement in play. If they had a settlement in play, then we would lose an additional culture point for each settlement belonging to the West in play at that time. So because there is no Western settlements in play, we dodge a bullet there, and we're just simply going to lose 1 culture point. So we adjust the culture points from 3 on down to 2 on the general record track, and so that is the only effect of the culture attack upon us. So now we have, we return back. There's APs yet to spend, so we go back to step 3 of this procedure. The enemy has a total of 3 APs to spend, one of which is over on the general record track, and the other is represented by this counter here in the available enemy APs box. So the topmost Western instruction is instruction C, which says war, and it has an AP cost of 4. So the enemy doesn't have enough APs to execute that instruction. So what we're going to do is that's going to break us out of the 622A procedure, and so we're going to break out of that loop, as it were, go down to step 6 of the 622A procedure. And what we're going to do here is we're going to return this counter to the draw cup, and we are going to increase the counter, the available enemy APs on the general record track by the value of that counter. So it goes from 1 to 3. So basically they banked those 2 APs in addition to the one they had saved earlier when they had to make change. And so 3 enemy APs are available to the next enemy who activates. So go ahead. I'm going to give you one more reading assignment before we wrap up this video. I would like to finish up the Operation Cleanup phase in this video. So go ahead and just pause the video for a moment and read section 623 in the rulebook before we continue. Okay, so in section 632 of the rulebook, if you played Navajo Wars, you're going to get this right away because it's pretty much the same thing as Navajo Wars. It's just that we've added more columns to the display in this game. Basically, it's just resetting the instruction display. How does that work? It's really, really simple. It's kind of a difficult rule to write, but it's very easy to understand. What we do, first of all, is we take all the counters one at a time, and we move them so that they fill the topmost spaces in the active enemy's column on this display. There's never any stacking on the enemy instruction display. Counters don't stack here. So at one at a time, we move counters so that the topmost spaces are filled, and the order of the counters does not change. Okay, so everything just shifts up so that the topmost spaces are filled, and that leaves only empty spaces at the bottom. Then one at a time, we go from bottom to top, and these counters then slide down, around, and up. And what that has done is it's a very subtle way of reordering the behavior of the enemy in the game. So basically, these counters swapped orders. So the more orders, or excuse me, instructions that an enemy executes that ends up over here in the inactive column, the more the ordering or the reordering of those counters will happen in that active enemy's column. So if they only execute one instruction, like if they only did this one here, then everything shifts up, this would shift to the bottom, and that would be the end of it. And that will be somewhat more common in this game than, say, in Navajo Wars. However, you will have runs where the enemy will execute a bunch of instructions, maybe even emptying a column, in which case basically the column is going to be replaced, but everything's going to be in reversed order. So that's how reordering, resetting, if you will, the enemy instruction display works in the game. So again, let me just back everything up so you can see it again. I want to make sure it's really, really clear how this works. When you're resetting the enemy instruction display, you start at the top of the active column, and one at a time you move each counter so it fills the topmost empty space. So we do this one at a time. In Vassal, it's tempting to grab them and drag them all. In the physical game, you can actually just slide them. The counters are thick enough that you can just grab the bottom one and just kind of slide them up. Then we go ahead and take the inactive column and we do the reverse. We start at the bottom and we fill the topmost empty space in the active column like so. And when we are done, the only empty spaces that should be in any active column will be at the bottom. There should never be empty spaces at the top or in the middle of a column when this is done. I'm going to point out one last thing before we end the video. There's something very different in this game from Navajo Wars. So if you played that game, I don't want you to be confused by this, but there are instructions in this game that will cause counters to be removed from this display, and they will end up on the map. For example, when war breaks out, this counter will go onto the map, and it'll remain there until the war is over. In that case, all of these counters after the reset would be doing this. We would reset just like we just did in our present situation, but there's no counter in the inactive column to shift over to fill that bottommost space, and that's not a problem. We just simply leave that space empty. Okay, so that's why the wording in the rulebook says topmost empty space in its column, etc. And so it is possible to have an empty space in a column, sometimes several empty spaces in a column. If there's a where that can happen is really with the north, where you can have an ally marker on the map and you can have a second ally marker on the map, and then a raid is in place. So you could actually have 3 empty spaces at the bottom of this counter, bottom of this column. So those are some things that can happen in this game. If you're familiar with Navajo Wars, that may strike you as being very, very different, and maybe you might be looking at it like, man, I must be doing something wrong. No, that's a design intent, and it's just something that we chose to do a little bit differently in this game. So there you go. That's the end of the Operation Cleanup phase. Basically, or the end of the 622A procedure. We go back to the Operation Cleanup phase. Step 4 of Operation Cleanup phase is what we return to here. And basically what this phase does is really nothing at all until the Santa Fe Trail card is revealed. And that only is going to happen at the beginning of the 3rd historic period of the game. And what that's going to do is there's a whole step that happens where these wagon train spaces can receive counters from the draw cup, from the success check draw cup. And so we didn't really talk a whole lot about this in the printed tutorial, so let me just explain really quick what will happen here. Is when Santa Fe Trail has been revealed from the deck during period 3 of the during historic period 3 of the game. During step 4 of every Operation Cleanup phase, we take a counter from the draw cup and it gets placed into one of these spaces. It can, I believe it takes out bison. It's nasty, okay? Basically, it's going to go into any space on here that doesn't contain a tribe or a band or a rancheria. And wagon train spaces are defined as spaces that are connected by a line connection with a wagon train depiction above it. So basically, this space, this space, this space, this space, and this space are wagon train spaces. And so if there's not a round space that could receive a marker because they all have one, let's say like this was the case here, and let's just say that all of these spaces had one of these markers from the draw cup, and you get to step 4 of Operation Cleanup, then what would happen instead of placing a new counter is you simply reveal all the counters that were there, and then they get executed. It's really, really bad stuff. Success markers that get revealed here, they go back in the draw cup, but the APs, they go down into the APs box, they get resolved. And basically, it means the enemy is going to be a lot more active against you, the player. But fortunately, you don't have to worry about that. This is the time when the Comanche are very active. They maintain the strategic initiative. The enemy is reacting to you, not the other way around. But just bear in mind that that is eventually going to change in the game, and that these areas of the map are going to be very, very important for you to control and to police as best you can. And that's going to be increasingly difficult because perhaps the bison population is going to be moving to other areas of the map, and you have other priorities in other places. Long story short is it becomes 6 holes and 5 fingers time for you, the player. So that's some of the stuff to look forward to in Comancheria. We have now finished up through half of page 9. We're going to be, we'll start the next video, and we'll look at a planning operation in the next video. We'll be starting up at on page 9 of your playbook. What I think I'm going to do here before I end the video is I'm going to give you a reading assignment to read before you go into the next video. And it'll probably be a couple days before I get the next video up. I'm going to try to upload this one tonight. But I'd like for you to pause here and read section 4.3 of the rulebook, which deals with the planning operation. Read that section of the rulebook, and then when the next video comes up, we'll walk you through a planning operation, and we'll see how what's going to happen to these success counters. What function does this play by putting them into this box? That'll all get explained to you. So you'll start to see the interaction between the different game mechanics in Comancheria. Again, thank you for watching. Thank you for purchasing the game. I'm hoping you enjoy the game. I'm hoping that this is teaching you how to play. And we'll try to get that next video up either Thursday night or Friday night. We'll try to get that uploaded for you.